The studio smelled faintly of eucalyptus and warm cedar, the kind of scent that usually pulled tension from muscles the moment someone stepped inside. But Elena still felt the heaviness settle deep between her ribs. It wasn't the kind that a stretch or a breath could release. It was the old kind, the kind that lingered even after escaping the life she never talked about, even after months of building a quiet, fragile existence here. The rain outside slicked the city streets, modeling the windows with silver trails that caught the low glow of the studio's sconces. The air was dim, soft, calm, everything she needed but never quite felt. She stood at the front of the room, hands steadying her mat, even though she'd placed it in the same precise spot every class night. It grounded her. Control brought peace, however fleeting. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn at first. She was reviewing the breathing sequence in her head. But then she felt it. A shift in air pressure. A presence weighted with something she couldn't name at first. Something that smelled faintly of rain-soaked wool and cold night air. When she looked up, he was standing there. Tall. Dark. Water beading along the shoulders of a charcoal coat that looked hand-stitched and tailored to a body built from strength rather than aesthetics. He had the kind of presence that made the room feel smaller, as if he carried his own gravity and everything else had to rearrange around it. His eyes, deep, almost black, the color of volcanic rock, swept the space with a slow, assessing precision before landing on her. For a heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. Not from attraction, though that pulse was undeniable, but from a recognition buried under the instinctive caution that had kept her alive before she rebuilt herself here. He wasn't ordinary. He wasn't harmless. Men who moved like that rarely were. He approached the front desk with a pace that seemed unhurried but purposeful, each step a quiet claim on the floorboard. Elena tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and tried to ignore the spike of awareness crawling along her spine. "Is it too late to join the class?" His voice carried a low, warm timbre, edged with a Sicilian accent softened by years in this city. He pronounced the words carefully, but the music of his heritage lingered beneath them. "No," she said, steadying her breath. "You're on time." An understatement. He was always on time, she assumed. He looked like the sort of man who controlled clocks rather than obeyed them. He nodded once. "I'm new. Someone recommended this place." Someone. He said it like it meant something, like the unseen threads of his world pulled even here. Elena tried not to dwell on that. "Welcome," she murmured. "Take any mat you like." He didn't thank her, not rudely, just factually. As if gratitude was currency he didn't trade lightly. He chose the mat nearest the back, but even there, he commanded attention. The other students, professionals shaking off their workday, women who came with friends, men seeking a moment's peace, shifted around him unconsciously, as if trying to carve out space for the quiet dominance he radiated. Elena inhaled slowly, centering herself, then stepped to the front of the room. "Let's begin." The lights dimmed on their timer, and the soft hum of meditative music filled the space. She guided them into slow stretches, grounding breaths, gentle movements designed to ease them into their bodies. But her awareness kept drifting toward him, not because he was out of place, but because the contrast was so stark it almost felt unreal. His body flowed through the postures with a controlled strength that spoke of discipline rather than peace. A man used to constant vigilance, attempting stillness, and failing, not in movement, but in energy. Every shift of muscle echoed with tension that had nothing to do with yoga. When he moved into a forward fold, the hem of his shirt pulled up slightly, and in that moment, she saw them. Scars. Long, jagged, curved, imprecise. Not surgical, not accidental. The kind earned in places where pain was currency and survival was a miracle. They crossed his ribs and flank in patterns she recognized all too well, memories flashing like lightning, memories of a different life, different man, different violence. Her throat tightened, and she forced herself to turn back to her mat, before her reaction softened into visibility. The past had no place here. She refused to let it. But the moment replayed in her mind as she continued leading the class. His scars weren't old. Some had healed in ways that suggested they were inflicted with intent. A blade. More than one. The angle of one wound was unmistakably consistent with a stiletto, a knife favored by men who lived by codes older than this country, codes written in blood. She swallowed. Her hands trembled briefly as she demonstrated the next pose. And then something happened that she didn't expect. During the extended hold of pigeon pose, a deeply vulnerable position, she saw his jaw clench, breath faltering. Not from inflexibility, not from pain, but from something deeper, sharper, a memory, a reflex. Her heart twisted before she could stop it. The class ended 15 minutes later, and as students filed out, she stepped into the soft quiet of the dimly lit room. She was gathering mats when she realized he hadn't left. He stood near the back wall, hands at his sides, as if waiting for something he wasn't sure he should ask for. She approached slowly. "How was your first class?" He looked at her then, and the entire room rearranged itself inside her chest. Up close, he was even more arresting. The low lighting caught the angles of his face, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw softened by day-old stubble, eyes like dusk on Sicilian coastlines. "It was different," he said. The pause in his words wasn't hesitation, it was translation. He was choosing the correct English rather than trusting instinct. "Harder than I expected." "You did well." He didn't smile, but something eased behind his eyes. "You have a calming presence." Her breath caught. It wasn't a flirtation, it wasn't manipulation. It was a statement made by someone who didn't often acknowledge solace, someone who didn't receive it. "Thank you," she said quietly. He dipped his chin in a subtle nod. "I'll be back next week." His certainty stole her words. Not, "I'll try." Not maybe. "I'll be back." As if this room had offered him something vital, something he needed more than he'd anticipated. He stepped toward the door, hand brushing the edge of his coat. As he reached for the handle, she spoke without thinking. "Buona serata." He stilled. She hadn't used Italian in years, not since she left the life that had nearly ruined her. But the phrase slipped out, soft and instinctual. Slowly, he turned back to her, eyes sharpening with something she couldn't read. "You speak Italian," he said. Not a question, a revelation. "Only a little." A lie, but safer than truth. He studied her closely, gaze moving with the care of a man trained to notice inconsistencies. She felt exposed beneath it, like he could see the shadows she'd worked so hard to cover. For a moment, neither spoke. Then his expression changed, subtly but unmistakably, as if she had become something unexpected, something worth reassessing entirely. "È raro sentirlo qui," he murmured. "It's rare to hear it here." His accent thickened when he slipped into his mother tongue, and for the first time, she sensed vulnerability. Thin, brief, but real. She nodded, unsure whether her voice would betray her if she tried to use it. He held her gaze a beat longer. Then he left, the studio door closing softly behind him. The moment the latch clicked, Elena slid to the floor beside her mat, heart hammering against her ribs. She had seen his scars. She had spoken his native language. And he had looked at her like someone who hadn't expected to be known, at least not here, not by a woman teaching yoga in a quiet corner of the city. She whispered a small prayer, for safety, for strength, for distance, but prayers rarely listened when fate already had its hand in the room. The week passed more slowly than Elena expected, her thoughts drifting back to him at odd, inconvenient moments. Not because of the way he looked, though that alone would have been enough to unsettle a steadier woman, but because of the way she had felt when he watched her. Not threatened, not intimidated, seen. It was dangerous to want that. By the next class night, the rain had returned, as if trying to repeat the strange alchemy of their first meeting. She arrived early, lighting the tea candles along the shelves and adjusting the dimmer until the room sat in that soft threshold between light and shadow. A sanctuary, a hiding place, a stage where truth slipped through cracks in quiet moments. Students trickled in. She greeted each, checking attendance, answering questions, forcing her breath calm. And then he walked in, this time without the coat, though the storm still clung to him in the damp edges of his hair. He wore a fitted black shirt that accentuated the broad lines of his shoulders and chest, the fabric moving with him like it understood who it belonged to. His presence didn't disrupt the room. It claimed it, silently, the way a king might take his rightful place among subjects without raising his voice. He nodded at her from across the reception area. Not a greeting exactly, more an acknowledgement, like the kind exchanged between two people who shared a secret neither intended to speak aloud. Her fingers curled around the edge of the desk to steady herself. She wasn't prepared for the way her heartbeat responded, or the warmth that rose beneath her skin, treacherous and uninvited. He took the same mat as before, back row, left side, eyes trained on her, with a focus that bordered on disarming. Not predatory, not invasive, intentional. When class began, she fell into her rhythm, the practiced cadence of instruction smoothing over the nerves, humming beneath her skin. She kept her voice steady as she guided them through each posture, but part of her, traitorous, curious, kept drifting back to him. He moved differently tonight. Not smoother, but more open in certain transitions, less guarded. When he lifted into warrior pose, the light caught another scar running across his forearm. A thin line, pale with age, but unmistakably formed by a blade. And yet his movements held a new ease, as if the discipline of the practice, even in its unfamiliarity, offered him a rare moment of peace. During Savasana, the final resting posture, the room dimmed further as the timer ticked into the last 5 minutes. Students lay on their mats, stillness settling like snowfall, but she could feel him watching her before she even glanced his direction. Not watching her body, watching her breath, her stillness, her presence. Like she had become some kind of compass in a world he navigated by shadows and silence. When the class ended and students began drifting out, she stayed kneeling beside her mat, cleaning blocks and checking equipment. She was expecting him to leave early. Men like him never lingered unless they wanted something. Tonight, he lingered. He approached her with slow steps, his expression unreadable, but softer around the edges. Closer, she noticed something she hadn't before, a faint scent of bergamot and peppered smoke, subtle but distinct. "You run a good class," he said quietly. "Thank you." Her voice felt too thin for the moment. "You're improving quickly." A faint lift touched the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, but something close, something he wasn't used to giving. "You watch carefully," he murmured. "Most teachers, they look but don't see." Her breath stalled. She tried to hold his gaze, but it felt too intimate. "It's my job." "No," he said, softer this time. "It's who you are." She stared at him, throat tightening. He didn't elaborate. He seemed to know he'd said too much already. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with something that felt like the beginning of a path neither should walk. Elena cleared her throat and tried to redirect. "You're Sicilian!" His eyes sharpened in surprise at her certainty. "You recognize the accent." "And the presence," she said before she could reconsider the word. His brow lifted faintly. "Presence!" Heat rose under her skin. "I just mean that you carry yourself like someone who learned discipline early." "And scars?" he asked, voice quiet but suddenly weighted. Her breath hitched. She hadn't meant to reveal that she'd noticed, but he had seen the flicker in her expression during class, just as she had seen the flicker behind his eyes when certain movements tugged old wounds. She hesitated, then nodded once. He exhaled slowly, gaze dropping for a moment to the floor, as if deciding something important. When he looked back up, the atmosphere between them shifted. "You said something last week," he murmured. "Before I left." Her pulse kicked. "I remember. The way you said it," he continued. The accent was not beginner's Italian. Her voice felt trapped behind her ribs. "I haven't used it in a long time." He stepped closer, not enough to invade, but enough to feel the heat radiating from him, enough that she could see the faint sheen of rain still clinging to his hairline. "May I ask," he said, low and deliberate, "where you learned it?" Her breath trembled. The truth was a locked room she didn't allow anyone inside. But lying to him felt dangerous in a different way. "My ex," she said finally, quietly. "His family was involved in things, and Italian was a part of it." Something dark flickered behind his eyes. Not jealousy, recognition, understanding of a world where men controlled too much and women paid for the cost of that control. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, voice gone quiet enough to shiver along her skin. She looked down. "I left. That's what matters." "It matters," he said, "but it's not the whole story." The room felt smaller, warmer, too intimate. Elena took a step back, not out of fear, but self-preservation. "I should finish closing up." He nodded, but the moment didn't break. It only settled, deepened. Before turning to leave, he hesitated. "What you said last week, the phrase. Most people say buonanotte or arrivederci, but you said buona serata." She nodded. "It's what my mother used to say," he murmured, the smallest fracture of vulnerability softening his voice. Hearing it again was unexpected. Her chest tightened. "I didn't mean anything by it," she whispered. "I know." His eyes held hers. "That's why it mattered." He turned then, leaving her heart rattling behind her ribs as he disappeared through the door. When it closed, she let out the breath she'd been holding. She didn't know it yet, not really, but something irreversible had shifted, and she felt it, deep and quiet, like the first tremor before the earth begins to break.